as the country has just witnessed with the merciless killing of the 20-year-old woman in Hammanskraal last week and the brutal murder of 5 women found burned to death near the Waterloo train station in Pretoria between June and July.
Good day, everyone. My name is Henry, and I certainly do welcome you to my YouTube channel. As you can probably notice, I have adopted a new format where I do speak in a more free and more homely tone, so I really do hope you appreciate this sense and this idea. And today's video, we're going to be speaking about something pretty sensitive, but I do certainly feel like it is pertinent to our current state in South Africa, and I'm pretty sure you can already guess from the title that I'm going to be speaking about gender-based violence. Now, gender-based violence, or shortened to GBV, refers to any harmful act, whether it be physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or economic, and this is directed at a person because of their gender. And although GBV can happen to anyone because it is gender-based, particularly in South Africa, most of the gender-based violence that does happen is towards women and girls, and they are often the ones that suffer socially or economically and are less empowered. Now, globally, right, the World Health Organization reports that about 1 in 3 women have experienced some form of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And that is an extremely high number. That is an uncanny number of, or the percentage of women that are physically or sexually exposed to violence. And it found that 33% of South African women have experienced some form of physical violence. And that's pretty scary. And to further elaborate, globally, right, the average is about 2 to 3 women per 100,000 that are killed because of their gender, right? In Africa, the average is about 2.9 per 100,000, right? But now get this, in South Africa, the rate of women being killed, murdered, right, has historically been recorded to be about 12.5 per 100,000. That is about 4 to 5 times higher than the global average, and this shows that South Africa really does have a problem. South Africa really does have an issue of femicide, and as widely as this is being spoken about, it doesn't really feel or seem like anything is being done, or nothing progressive is being seen. And yeah, I think that's pretty scary, and it's also pretty enraging. We'll get onto that much later in the video. Now, you might be asking yourself, why do South Africans, or the nation of South Africa, why do we suffer from gender-based violence? And there are many reasons, because gender-based violence has many aspects to it. But to keep it simple, I will explain point by point and really try to give you a bigger picture as to why GBV happens. Now, one of the first reasons that I will explain is in reference to historical and structural violence legacy. So now this is in reference to colonialism and apartheid. South Africa has a really long history of systemic violence, from colonial conquest to decades of apartheid. Right, and during apartheid, violence was not only normalized in public life, but also institutionalized, and communities experienced like forced removals, police brutality, political repression, and all those contributed to the idea of violence being instilled in certain communities. And this history created a culture where aggression was often seen as a normal way to assert control. And this is when societies normalized violence publicly and is often translated into private spaces such as like homes, where intimate partner violence becomes more common. And to give you a clearer picture on the actual stats, so roughly about 20 to 30 murders per 100,000 people per year in South Africa, right? Um, that's the rate, or that's the number of people that die every single year due to whatever reasons. Usually it is physical, but that's the amount of murders that happens. So about 20 to 30 murders, right? That's pretty scary, all right? The global average is about 6 per 100,000. So that is extremely scary, right? And our second reason is due to the patriarchal social norms as well as gender inequality. Now, many South African communities still hold beliefs that men should control women, including their mobility, their finances, or their sexual choices. Some men even see it as acceptable to discipline their partner, and a lot of women face social stigma for leaving abusive relationships. This is where these norms and ideas about GBV do stem from. And GBV is not only more frequent but underreported because survivors do fear shame, they do fear judgment, and they do fear losing social support. Right? According to the World Health Organization, globally, 1 in 3 women experience intimate partner violence. But now in South Africa, these studies to show that 1 in 3 women report physical or sexual abuse, but in many cases they are unreported, right? So this is just telling you that although we can say that 1 in 3 women report, or 1 in 3 women experience some form of physical or sexual harassment or assault, that's just taking into account those that were reported, right? Because this is one of the reasons why the GBV pandemic is a pandemic, is because it is largely unreported. And that's quite scary, that everything that we're basing our stats on isn't even an accurate representation of what's actually going on. And another shocking stat is about 40% of men believe that they have the right to use physical discipline against a partner in various communities. That's basically saying that some men believe that they have physical dominance or some form of dominance over someone else's body, which is quite scary. Imagine someone telling you that I have control over your body and I get to decide what I want to do. That's really scary. Another reason is due to high levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Now, I'll just go straight to the stats here. About 36% of the population lives below the national poverty line. Alright, so that's 36%. Alright, and get this, the percentage of unemployment in some provinces is over 50%. So that means that over 50% of the youth is unemployed in certain provinces. And now you may be asking, then how does this really contribute to GBV? And that's a very good question, right? So now economic stress fuels tension in households, as well as the fact that women who are financially dependent, right, feel trapped in abusive relationships, right? High unemployment, especially among men, can also increase stress and aggression. And because women have unequal access to certain resources, they are left in very dangerous situations. Now, the stats say that about 30% of murders and assaults in South Africa, they all involve alcohol. And studies have shown that households where men regularly abuse alcohol, are 2 to 3 times more likely to report intimate partner violence. And that is one of the reasons why GBV is such a prominent issue. Now, one of the biggest reasons why GBV is an issue in South Africa is due to the weak implementation, the impunity, as well as poor police response. You have a greater chance of probably just dying from the physical or the sexual abuse that you're going through than you are of actually getting the perpetrator convicted. And that's a scary thought to have, because the actual stats say that, so one of the parliamentary reports show that less than 10% of sexual offense cases result in conviction, and many police stations, they lack trained GBV units, This means that probably if you were to get sexually assaulted right now as a woman in South Africa, you're more likely to see this man in the same grocery shop that you go to see him at your child's school or wherever, because the chances of him getting convicted are so low. They're actually so low that you could probably bump into him, or I really do hope that you don't even live with him, because that's a totally different story. But that's just to show you and to illustrate to you how low the conviction rates are. And now I will move on to the part that I was really contemplating on putting into the video, but I do feel like for us to really understand the scope and the real implications of GBV, I was really contemplating on putting victim stories here, but I ultimately decided to, because I do feel like that their stories should be heard and these cases should be heard. They shouldn't be silenced, right? Yeah. So the first case we have is Olerato Mongale, right? This is a case from 2025, right? Now, Olerato was a 30-year-old, right? At the time of her unfortunate death, she was pursuing a master's degree in ICT policy and regulation at the University of Witwatersrand. Right, she studied journalism at Rhodes University and worked previously as a communications professional, including work in government, the private sector, consulting, and even teaching in English abroad, right, particularly in South Korea, right. Her family and her friends described her as a bright, full of ambition, passionate about learning, and just really someone who's she was described as someone who's shining light, right, and whose life had potential. On the 25th of May 2025, Olerato left her residence in Athol, Johannesburg, for what she thought was a date with a man she only knew as John. Now, CCTV footage as well as her phone's location data confirmed that she got into a white VW Polo with cloned license plates around 3 o'clock, right, in the afternoon, and less than 2 hours later, her body was found dumped on a street in Lombardy West, Johannesburg. The discovery was made by police and alerted by community members after her friends attempted to trace her phone and found her belongings abandoned. The VW Polo used in the crime was traced to a panel beater shop in Phoenix, Durban, right, and a man linked to the vehicle was arrested. The prime suspect, now I can't seem to pronounce his name, but I genuinely don't even care, because I don't believe that he even deserves that, but I will try. His name was Filang Ngenkosi Makanya, and he was tracked to a flat in Amazimtoti in KZN, where police attempted to arrest him, but he opened fire, and thankfully he was killed in the shootout with police. Now, another man initially named in connection with the murder, Fezile Ngubane, was later cleared of any wrongdoing, and police concluded his identity had been exploited by the main suspect to activate SIM cards and carry out the crime. Right, so that's a pretty dirty thing to do. A third suspect, Bungani Ntimkulu, remains at large, and according to police at the time of the latest reporting, is still out there. So this just shows you that there are more layers to this case than it is, right? In light of this, the community members held a candlelight service in Lombardy West shortly after her body was found, and the funeral was held in Bloemfontein. That was her hometown. And her family members, her friends, and activists called for justice and systemic change. And this is quite a sad story. Someone who's really well educated, someone who had a really bright future, having their lives ended just because, they're trying to find love, they're trying to find, their lifelong partner. And really, I just wonder what was going through her mind in those last moments. And it's quite scary that she had to endure that, and the fact that she was all alone is quite unnerving. But now it begs the question, what do we do about this? How do we tackle this? GBV is such an intricate issue that it just can't be dealt with simply by saying, we're going to put plans in place. We need to be strategic about how we approach GBV. And there are a couple of ways that have been proven, not only by other nations that have struggled with this in the past, but just countries that mitigate this. They say prevention is better than cure. And there are certain measures that countries have put in place to sort of prevent outbursts and things being coined as femicide. All right. And for that matter, any woman dying at the hands of a man, is femicide. But I really do think that the cases in South Africa really, I don't even think femicide is the word to describe what's happening here. We can put it as like a genocidal femicide. Like, that's how bad it is here. And so there are a couple of plans that I will sort of highlight just to help you think about how we can actually approach this, not only as people, but as institutions and as societies and as people and as individuals. And so the first solution, I guess, is to really target the fact that there are a lot of people that are uneducated, that are not prepared or not skilled enough to handle issues pertaining to GBV. We could possibly start from the political structures, all the way down to institutional structures. So what do I mean by that? So we're going to start with police stations, people in power, politicians have certain portfolios that each politician has to create or be proficient in. And so they will appoint respective people that will have or occupy this particular portfolio in government and handle this. And I do feel like a separate and specific portfolio for sexual offenses should be created. And in that way, it's more specialized and more directed as opposed to dealing it very generally, because it's kind of like expecting a general crime prevention unit to stop stabbings specifically. All right. If we struggle with shootings, stabbings, and let's say acid attacks, what do you think a crime prevention unit is going to do if you want to specifically lessen the amount of stabbings. You need a very specific task team, call it like a stabbing, I guess, prevention unit, something like that. And that's sort of the vision for GBV, and I think that's the approach that we should go for as not only political structures but as well as institutions. So what I mean by this is having specific portfolios in schools, specific portfolios in universities, at workplaces that deal with this. I don't believe HR is enough to deal with all the issues that we're dealing with, because what you report someone getting sexually assaulted at your workplace, and it pretty much ends there. He's going to lose his job. Okay, then what happens after? All right, are we going to let this person get hired, even if he's like he loses whatever? Let's say he was a lawyer, he loses his license. Maybe he works another informal job. I don't think the people there are safe enough, and so this is why we need to have specific portfolios that really narrow and hit the nail on the head and be like, hey, this person is an actual threat to society and a threat to women. He should not be allowed to do this. He should not be allowed to do that. All right, and that is what just the upskilling of political and institutional structures means. The next thing is to start from schools. I do believe that if we can be more transparent and be more translucent about our statistics and be more open about it, it would be more productive or progressive for South Africa, because we get a true depiction of what GBV actually looks like. Because it's scary now, but I truly don't believe that we have the full scope of things, and we won't have the full scope of things anytime soon unless we obviously put measures in place to not only address the fact that a lot of women do feel scared to report this, but also because a lot of these cases either stop at the police station or stop with the sheriff on duty, and it doesn't go anywhere higher than that, and that's an issue, and that's something that should be addressed. And that's just essentially what the point about having to be translucent with statistics. All right, this helps us to gauge what we actually need to do. And the next thing, and I do understand that this is something that is ongoing, this is something that South Africa and South African governments are trying to do, is to implement GBV hotlines, all right? But I don't feel, and I don't see that enough, all right? Even at schools, I do feel like there should be some form of anonymous hotline for women to feel comfortable enough to open up. And not only the women, remember I did speak that GBV is per gender, all right? So this includes males as well, and it certainly isn't just exclusively for females, but with the scope of things, I don't really see a lot of cases of men getting abused and everything. Obviously they do, but it's not nearly as much as females. And so I do believe that there should be specific hotlines, as well as in institutions, in political structures as well, because as much as we can believe that or think that people in power don't experience things like this, they also do. Just a lot of things goes under the rug. Once you have money, you're an extremely powerful person. And so even in higher structures such as those, there should be anonymous hotlines, right? And these people should be extremely trained. They should know how to speak to these people calmly and patiently. And just to elaborate on it a little, is because, over here we have the emergency hotline. And the one time, so we were out with a couple of my friends, and one of my friends witnessed someone. So it was in a restaurant sort of place, and they were having what seemed to be a seizure of some sorts, and we had to call the emergency hotline. And the lady was disturbingly rude, and you can imagine that's like life-threatening. Now imagine if she's being extremely rude in such a life-threatening situation, what it's like to be reporting something in relation to sexual violence or physical violence, yet. And so it should be people who are skilled, people who are actually passionate about this, and not just people who want to get a salary or fill in a vacancy. All right. And yeah, this really just sums up the video. I really hope that this format works a little better. I will go back to the formal setup if you do prefer that, but I really do like this structure, and I think that today's topic is really sad. I was really sad to do this. I actually didn't want to do the video because I felt like I wouldn't be too happy with what I'd see online, and I truly wasn't. There are some cases that I just point blank couldn't say over here because of the sheer brutality of it, and YouTube is quite strict with issues like that, and I really do feel like you wouldn't be able to get the full scope of the case. And yeah, but I do encourage you to do read online, do find these stories, send them to your friends, because I do feel like education and knowledge is the first step into handling GBV. Our mindset has to change. Then a lot of things will change. But other than that, I bid you all farewell, and I really do hope you guys have a rested, festive season.